Chapter 4. Special Regulations and Other Important Considerations. Oregon Rule, Limitations on Pesticide Products Containing Aminocyclopyrachlor, or 603-057-0392. On May 9, 2019, the Oregon Department of Agriculture, ODA, adopted OR 603-057-0392, a permanent rule limiting the use of the herbicide aminocyclopyrachlor, ACP, on certain sites and prohibiting the use on others. ACP is a broadleaf herbicide applied to soil and vegetation and is quickly absorbed by roots and leaves. This rule was adopted in response to multiple reports of negative impacts to tree species, including ponderosa pine and lodgepole pine, in several locations in Oregon where ACP was applied along rights of way. Major provisions of the permanent rule are described in the table on the following page. For more information on this rule, contact the ODA Pesticides Program. The complete rule text for OR 603-057-0392 is available at https://oda.fyi/OR603 Limitations on pesticide products containing aminocyclopyrachlor. 1. Prohibits the application of ACP on rights of way, natural areas, and restoration areas unless applications are non-contiguous and, in the aggregate, do not exceed more than 5% of an acre. Use is limited to 1 application per 365 days, and uses to control state or county listed noxious weeds. 2. Prohibits the application of ACP on inner and outer banks of ditches and canals. 3. Prohibits ACP use where roots of non-target trees or shrubs may extend. 4. Prohibits all aerial application of ACP. 5. Prohibits ACP applications in sage-grouse areas unless applications are non-contiguous and, in the aggregate, do not exceed more than 5% of an acre. Use is limited to 1 application per 365 days, and uses to control state or county listed noxious weeds. 6. Prohibits plant material that have been treated with or exposed to ACP from being used in compost, mulch, or animal bedding that is subsequently used for compost or mulch. 7. Defines rights of way specific to ACP use. 8. Failure to comply may result in revocation, suspension, or refusal to issue or renew a certification or license and/or civil penalty. Oregon Rule, Crops Grown for Seed Production. OR 603-057-0535. Oregon is one of the U.S. primary vegetable, forage, flower, herb production, and seed production states. For a number of reasons, when a crop is grown for seed production, different pesticide options may be necessary than if the crop is being grown for food, feed, or other purposes. When a crop is grown for food or feed, one of the requirements prior to the use of a pesticide on the crop is that the U.S. EPA has established a pesticide residue tolerance *. However, a very effective pesticide that controls a pest in a seed crop may not have an established tolerance on that particular crop. For example, a grower may want to use a pesticide on carrots grown for seed, but there is not a tolerance for that particular pesticide established on carrots. FLFRA allows states to grant special local need (SLN) registrations under FIFRA Section 24(c), which may allow waiving of the tolerance requirement on the seed crop, if certain restrictions are followed. In Oregon, there are numerous SLNs which allow for the use of pesticides on certain seed crops in which there are no tolerances established on the corresponding food or feed crops. Pesticide use on crops grown for seed rule, OR 603-057-0535. This rule mandates certain feeding restrictions must be followed, if a tolerance has not been established by EPA. The feeding restrictions prohibit the feeding of forage, seed screenings and other byproducts. It also prohibits the use of seeds for sprouting. There are also disposal or composting requirements for seed screenings, and record-keeping requirements. There are a few pesticides that EPA has exempted from tolerance requirements. Oregon Rule, Limitations on Pesticide Products Containing Clopyralid, OR 603-057-0378. In 2003, ODA enacted a rule to reduce the potential for clopyralid-treated materials, including grass clippings, from contaminated compost, OR 603-057-0378. This rule was enacted in response to multiple reports of damage to landscape and garden plants from compost products found to be contaminated with the herbicide active ingredient clopyralid. The rule prohibits the use of products containing clopyralid on certain sites, including residential lawns, commercial and public turf plantings, school grounds, parks, or recreational areas other than golf courses. This rule supersedes product label language. This means that, even if a pesticide user has a product with a pesticide label which provides directions for use on lawns or similar prohibited sites, the product cannot be used on the sites prohibited by the rule. The rule also allowed uses on other sites, and a mandate that the label must clearly and prominently display the following statement. Use of this product in Oregon is limited to the sites stated on this label, which are agricultural, forest, right-of-way, golf course or cemetery sites. The rule requires manufacturers to include specific language on the label of products sold or distributed in Oregon by January 1, 2004. For more information, contact the ODA Pesticides Program. Oregon rule prohibits the application of 4 neonicotinoid insecticides, or 603-057-0388. Due to concerns for the health of pollinators, Oregon has prohibited the use of any pesticide product containing the active ingredients dinotefuran, imidacloprid, thiomethoxam, or clothianidin, by any application method, to linden trees, basswood trees, or other tilia species. This means that in Oregon, even if a pesticide label allows for this use, it is prohibited to use the product on linden trees in Oregon. The permanent rule went into effect on February 27, 2015. For more information on this rule, contact the ODA Pesticides Program. For the complete rule, see OR 603-057-0388. Buffers. To protect people, fish, wildlife, endangered plants, or sensitive crops, pesticide labels may require or recommend buffers, no spray zones, adjacent to the areas that need protection. These buffers help reduce pesticide exposure, which may occur because of drift or runoff. If fish or other aquatic organisms have been identified as needing protection, a maintained grassy filter strip or some other type of vegetation next to a waterway may also be mandated or recommended on the pesticide label. In addition to buffers on pesticide labels, there can also be buffers required by state law, or court-mandated buffers. EPA's and ODA's websites are kept up to date regarding any court-ordered buffers. EPA facilitates some court-ordered buffers through Salmon Mapper or Bulletins Live 2. For additional buffers relating specifically to forestry applications, refer to the Forest Practices Act, FPA, and other laws. Under certain conditions, there are buffers established to protect fish and aquatic habitat. In 2015, the Oregon legislature enacted ORS 527.672 pertaining to aerial herbicide applications, when a forest operation involves applying herbicides by aircraft near an inhabited dwelling or school. The operator is responsible for leaving an unsprayed strip of at least 60 feet adjacent to the dwelling or school. The responsibility of the operator under this section is in addition to any responsibility of the aerial pesticide applicator under ORS Chapter 634. Contact the Oregon Department of Forestry for interpretation of the FPA and ORS 527.672. Coexistence, how to be a good neighbor. Oregon agriculture is a constantly changing and evolving industry. As Oregon agriculture diversifies, and the interface between agricultural and populated areas grows, so does the chance for drift exposure to crops and people and the increased need for open communication. Crops such as grapes, berries, and nursery stock are being planted in place of crops such as field crops and pasture. These newer crops can be particularly sensitive to certain types of herbicides, even when applied at low rates. Other crops that require commercial bees for pollination are replacing wind-pollinated crops. As Oregon's economy expands, so does the need for additional housing and schools, which are often built in agricultural communities and adjacent to agricultural land. It is essential that agricultural practices, including pesticide use, be conducted in a respectful manner. Two key elements of coexistence are communication, initiate open communication with other nearby agricultural producers, beekeepers and neighbors, and awareness, be aware of your surroundings prior to product selection and timing of applications, especially near people, sensitive crops, and pollinators. Below are some common examples to help achieve coexistence. If you are growing a crop and plan to use an herbicide near a sensitive crop, such as grapes, talk to the neighbor prior to making any pesticide application. Find out if the crop is at a particularly vulnerable stage. Learn how to minimize risks and what other possible alternative products are available. Make sure you and your employees know how to prevent drift and minimize the chance of volatilization. If you farm next to a school, hospital, daycare facility, etc., time your applications when the fewest people are present, and select products that have low odor. When applying pesticides next to blooming crops that may have bees visiting the crop or Beehives placed for pollination services. Think about your selection of insecticide, and its toxicity to bees. Communicate with the grower of the blooming crop, and if possible, with his or her beekeeper. Avoid making applications when the wind may carry the pesticide towards blooming crops. Talk to your neighbor to find out when the hives will be removed to avoid bee kills. It is critical that good communication take place between producers, their employees, crop consultants and commercial applicators. Producers should provide information regarding nearby sensitive crops, pollinators, schools, waterways, and endangered species to applicators. Exposure of workers and handlers to pesticides is covered under the Worker Protection Standard, WPS. However, the awareness of the location of farm workers, and the location of migrant labor housing and occupants is an important part of coexistence. Coexistence is about common sense, courtesy, good communication, and having the best information to make informed decisions regarding pesticide selection and timing. Coexistence, being aware of culturally significant plants. Prior to any application being made, it is important to be aware of culturally significant plants in the treatment area. Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes rely on these plants for food, medicine, and ceremonial purposes. Culturally significant plants not only grow on tribal reservations but can also be found on the tribes seated in ancestral territories. Contact tribal cultural resource experts in advance of an application to ensure that these significantly important resources are protected. Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes are as follows. Burns Powhatan Tribe. Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians. Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community. Confederated Tribes of Siletz. Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs. Coquille Tribe. Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Indians. Klamath Tribes. For more information, please contact each of the tribes through the Legislative Commission on Indian Services website, https://www.oregonlegislature.gov/cis. Additional considerations. When making pesticide applications. When making pesticide applications to homes, hotels, multifamily housing, hospitals, nursing homes, daycare facilities, commercial businesses etc., it is best to use common sense and to follow the suggestions listed below. Select pesticide products that have low odor. Do not spray over kids' or pets' toys, pet food, and water bowls that may be on the floor or in the yard. Cover fish bowls in aquariums. When making an application to one part of a building that could affect people working or living in other parts of the building, check the label to see if the ventilation system needs to be turned off to those areas of the building prior to the application. Follow label directions for applications to areas where food is prepared, and if the label requires ventilation of the structure after a pesticide application, it is the pesticide applicator's responsibility to ventilate the structure and to notify the occupants when they may return to the building. Pesticides and the aging applicator. As people age, pesticide exposure can impact some people differently than when they were young. This may result in additional harm. This includes exposure from the occasional spill or splash on the skin, or the more common inhalation of tiny droplets. Chemicals can enter the body more easily because the skin gets thinner and its elasticity decreases, making absorption easier. Our nervous systems change, so we don't notice irritation or burning sensations as fast as we did when we were young. Skin exposures last longer and do more damage because we don't sense them as quickly. Reduced blood flow and shrinking livers and kidneys can work together to slow the break down and removal of pesticides from the body. In addition, prescription drugs and pesticides can interact inside the body. Older adults may take more prescription drugs than younger people. If someone is taking certain medications that put a burden on their liver and kidneys, those organs won't be as good at breaking down and removing pesticides from the bloodstream. This makes the same exposure last longer, potentially doing more harm. Disease also can reduce your body's ability to remove pesticides from the body. If you're older than your co-workers, you can set a good example in the way you wear, clean, store, and inspect your PPE. It's never too late to improve your habits.